So now that we have an idea of what makes up an atom, what we need to start to understand is what each of those pieces actually does inside an atom. So what we're going to focus on today with this video is how to represent those different pieces through using atomic symbols. And then in class tomorrow, we're going to expand on that to the idea of an isotope. So we learned in our last unit that an atom has three main pieces. We have protons, neutrons, and electrons. We learned that protons and neutrons live inside the nucleus, and we also learned that electrons live outside the nucleus in the orbital clouds. One of the things that we focused a little bit on was the relative size. Electrons are much smaller than protons and neutrons. So the first thing we want to really understand is that if I'm looking at the number of protons and neutrons, those two pieces together make up the mass number for an atom. So it's a number of protons plus our number of neutrons. The other thing that we really need to understand is these protons are super important. Not only do they have a positive charge, but they are what identifies the element we're working with. So your number of protons is equal to something called the atomic number. And that's going to identify your element. So it's kind of like the element's fingerprint. So just like your fingerprint identifies you, the number of protons identifies the element that you're working with. So how do we know that? If we look at the periodic table, we see a box that looks similar to this. So let's go ahead and talk about what each part of the box means. This guy right here is easy. He's your element symbol. And that's going to be a shorthand notation for your element name. So the big C tells me I'm working with carbon. How I identify a carbon element is through this number here. This number here is your atomic number, which is going to give you the number of protons. So that's going to be what tells us that we have the element of carbon. This guy down here is the average atomic mass. And we'll talk more about him tomorrow. So for our purposes, we can go ahead and ignore him. So the important parts of information that we get from the periodic table is the atomic number located at the top and the element symbol. What we do as chemists is we take that information and we switch it to something like this. This guy is called an atomic symbol, and this is our focus for the video today. We want to be able to write these atomic symbols properly. So how you write an atomic symbol is it always follows this format. You'll have an A on top, a Z on the bottom, and an X on the side. Well, what the heck do A, Z, and X actually mean? This guy down here, Z, is going to be your atomic number. So you're going to copy him right off the periodic table. That atomic number is going to go with an element symbol. So these two pieces of information come from your periodic table. This guy up here is not going to come from your periodic table, so do not copy anything off your periodic table for this letter A. What this letter A represents is the mass number. And this is going to be the number of protons and the number of neutrons that you have in your atom. And we'll talk about how to get that mass number in just a second. But your atomic symbols will always follow this format. You'll always have a mass number on the top, an atomic number on the bottom, and your element symbol to the side. And it's your atomic number that dictates what your element symbol is going to be. So how the heck do we turn something we see on the periodic table into an atomic symbol? Well, first things first, let's copy down the stuff we know comes off the periodic table. So our atomic number and our symbol are always going to come right off. Oh, that was an awful arrow. Are always going to come right off. I'm going to erase that and make it better. Nope, it's not going to let me erase. All right, your atomic symbol and your atomic number are always going to come straight off that periodic table. So let's go ahead and start by writing a big C. And since this is our atomic number, That's going to go ahead and go on the bottom of our atomic symbol. So what we need to do is we need to fill in the mass number up top. Now, how do we get that mass number? One way we can give it to you is like this. We've given you the element name carbon 12. What this number 12 on the back means is the mass number. So if you see an element name with a number on the back, that mass number just gets copied right on top of your atomic symbol. So now we have the mass number on top, the atomic number on the bottom, and the element symbol on the side. And you can answer a whole bunch of questions based off this atomic symbol. One thing I could ask you is, how many protons do you have? We know that the protons come from the atomic number, so I just simply would copy down 6. Another thing I could ask you is, how many electrons do I have? We know that the protons are the positive part of the atom, so that would be a positive 6. Our negatives have to equal that, so that means we would have 6 electrons. The last thing I could ask you is, how many neutrons do you have? And this is where it's going to be a little bit tricky. We have to do math. We know that the mass number is going to be the number of protons plus the number of neutrons. So if I want to figure out my neutrons, I do subtraction. I know I've got a total mass of 12. I know I've got a total of 6 protons. So 12 minus 6 gives me 6 neutrons. Now, it's not always going to be like that. It's not always going to be where your protons, your electrons, and your neutrons are always going to be the same number. Okay, so you have to make sure that you do the math to get the right number of neutrons. So what's another way that I could ask you to go ahead and do these atomic symbol type problems? One thing I could do is I can give you a situation like this. I could say, give me the atomic symbol for the silicon atom that contains 14 neutrons. So in this one, I've told you how many neutrons you have, so we have to go and figure out the other pieces from the periodic table. So I know the element I'm working with is silicon, so I look at my periodic table. I see that silicon is the element symbol Si, and the number on the top is 14, so its atomic number is 14. So now to get the mass number, I need to add my number of protons to my number of neutrons. So since I know my atomic number is 14, and that tells me the number of protons, to get my mass number, I add my neutrons and my protons together to get me a total of 28. So my mass number for my element symbol would be 28. So I would have 28, 14, Si. What I'd like you guys to do is try this little bit easier practice problem. I'd like you to go ahead and try this one on the bottom. And on your Google form, if you could fill in how many electrons and neutrons this atom has, I'd really appreciate it. And we'll start class talking about that guy tomorrow. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, because your class has now been flipped.